There is something almost symbolic about watching Cheryl Miller brush off the question of whether she is the greatest women's basketball player of all time. She laughs, waves the praise away, and insists she is simply one of many. Yet anyone who understands the history of the sport knows that her humility is only part of the story. What happened at the 2024 WNBA All-Star Weekend was more than just a viral moment between legends and rising stars. It was a meeting of eras, a passing of power from a woman who carried the sport in a time when few were watching to a woman now carrying it in front of millions. When Cheryl Miller stood there coaching Caitlin Clark, the young guard whose scoring records and magnetic presence reshaped women's basketball almost overnight, it felt like time folding in on itself. It was a bridge between what the sport once was and what it is becoming, between the generation that built the game brick by brick and the generation now living in the house those bricks created. What makes this connection even more compelling is the simple truth that this wasn't their first encounter. Months earlier, long before the bright lights of All-Star Weekend, before the sold-out crowds and Olympic build-up, Miller had pulled Clark aside and given her advice that had nothing to do with shooting form or footwork. It was something deeper, something only a woman who once carried an entire sport on her shoulders could understand. She told Clark to guard her joy, to protect the quiet part of herself that had always loved the game before the fame, before the noise, before the demands of a world eager to label her the next savior. It was the kind of wisdom that only comes from living through an era where talent wasn't enough to save you from burnout, pressure, and expectations that often felt heavier than victory itself. To understand why these words mattered so much to Clark, you have to understand who Cheryl Miller was in her era. Long before the WNBA existed, long before college women's basketball had television deals or primetime exposure, Miller was redefining what female athletes were capable of. At USC, she wasn't just dominant, she was transformative. She led her team to national championships, stacked up national awards, and played with a level of physicality and athleticism the women's game had never seen. She could score, rebound, defend, and dunk in live game situations at a time when most people didn't think it was possible for women to do so. She wasn't playing a different version of basketball. She was playing the same game as the men, and sometimes she played it better. But Miller's prime came years before any professional women's league existed in the United States. She never had a chance to be a household name on a global stage. She never saw her jersey sold in stores or played in front of WNBA crowds. She watched the professional window arrive too late, opening only after injuries had ended her playing career. The foundation she built was essential, but she never got to stand under the spotlight she deserved. Caitlin Clark, on the other hand, stepped into a landscape Miller and her peers could have only dreamed of. Clark entered Iowa in 2020 and immediately electrified the sport. Her range, her creativity, her swagger, and her ability to command an entire offense turned her into a national sensation. By the time she finished college, she had rewritten the scoring record books for both men and women, broken viewership records every time she stepped onto the court, and turned women's basketball into a mainstream cultural phenomenon. Clark's games drew millions of viewers, eclipsing men's games that historically dominated national ratings. She carried Iowa to heights the program had never seen and became the most talked-about college basketball player in the country, male or female. Her leap to the WNBA was the most anticipated transition in women's basketball history, but it came with a weight Miller recognized instantly. Clark wasn't just becoming a professional athlete. She was becoming the face of an entire league. That is why Miller approached her back in 2023 and gave her that simple but profound message. It wasn't about basketball because Miller knew Clark could handle the basketball part. The real challenge would be everything surrounding it. The glare of media attention, the endless expectations, the pressure to perform every night even when exhausted, the criticism that would come not just from analysts but from peers who might resent the attention she brought, the responsibility of representing a league still fighting for bigger audiences, bigger paychecks, and bigger opportunities. Miller had lived under that spotlight before, carrying the sport without the support Clark has today. She wanted the new star to understand that greatness isn't just about points and trophies. It's about staying grounded when the world is pulling at you from every direction. When Clark entered the WNBA in 2024, that warning proved almost prophetic. Her first month was brutal in ways few rookies experience. The Indiana Fever struggled out of the gate with multiple losses. Clark was targeted physically on the court, hit hard by defenders who wanted to test her toughness or send a message. Off the court, she was criticized from every angle, treated as both savior and scapegoat for the league's growing pains. Some of the backlash was rooted in real basketball concerns, but some came from jealousy, from resentment, and from the ugly undertones that sometimes follow athletes who rise too quickly. When Clark arrived at All-Star Weekend exhausted, bruised, and under constant scrutiny, seeing Cheryl Miller again seemed to give her a moment of grounding she desperately needed. That connection deepened when Miller coached her during the exhibition game. There was something striking about watching the legend guide the prodigy, their body language echoing something almost motherly, almost protective. Miller understood Clark in a way most people didn't. She saw the weight behind the smile, the pressure behind the talent. And Clark, still navigating the hardest transition of her career, felt understood in a way she may not have felt for months. It was a generational embrace, a reminder that she wasn't alone in carrying the expectations that come with being the face of a sport. And then came the moment from early May, before the critics softened and before Clark gained her footing. Indiana had lost 5 straight games. The pressure was mounting. The media noise was deafening. But then Clark earned her first professional win against the Los Angeles Sparks. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of a career, but it mattered deeply. Miller, who happened to be present, found Clark after the game and gave her something she desperately needed: affirmation. She told her to savor the moment, to remember what winning felt like on her own terms, and above all else to stay true to herself. That message was a continuation of everything she had been trying to tell Clark since the day they first met. Protect your joy. Protect your identity. Protect the part of you that loves this game enough to withstand the pressure it brings. Their relationship is more than mentorship. It is a story of legacy, of sacrifice, of generational hope. Miller represents what women's basketball had to overcome. Clark represents what it has finally achieved. Together, they symbolize everything the sport has been and everything it has yet to become. What do you think this relationship means for the future of women's basketball? Will the next generation look at Caitlin Clark the way Clark looks at Cheryl Miller? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to dive deeper into these stories of legacy, pressure, and transformation in women's sports, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next breakdown.